Welcome. I entitled this series, Listen to What the Spirit Says, because that's what each of the letters to the seven churches says in it. But we'll get around to that. So we're looking primarily at the first three chapters of Revelation. Last week, we looked at chapter 1, just to set a background. And this week, what I'm wanting to do is look for a few minutes at Roman Asia. I thought it'd be useful to spend some time looking at the area where the seven congregations who received these letters from Jesus, and of course John penned them, were located. Because I think when we study any section of Scripture, context is always important. And when we know the area, maybe understand the background of what had been happening, and see the type of people who live there, I think we can sometimes better understand some of what they were going through. And I know as I put this together, it helped me to get maybe a little bit better grasp on what it was like in Roman Asia in the first century. So, what we want to do this evening, what I'm hoping to accomplish, I want to look at sort of three areas over the next sort of 45, 50 minutes. I want to look at Asia before Rome and a little bit of background of things that happened early on. I'm going to look at Rome's early years in Asia because the early Roman rule does set the tone for what's going to happen. And I also want to look at Roman Asia in the first century. So hopefully some of that you might be of interest to you. If you really hate history, you're really gonna hate this. But I happen to adore history, so it works for me. So anyway, let's begin by looking at Asia before Rome. Now, the area of what today is Western Turkey, and you see that little yellow strip there in the middle of that map, that has a very long history. Now, the name Asia is Greek. And if you read Greek, that's what it looks like in Greek. It says Asia, A-S-I-A. You can see where we got the name from. Initially, this this thing was only given to the eastern shore of the okay, something happened there. I'm not even sure what happened there. Can you all still see okay? Yeah, okay. I've had something happen on my screen, so I do not know what happened, but I'm sure something did. So, but initially, it was only given to the eastern shore there, and in the ancient Greek text, it's known as Answia. I think you would still pronounce that Asia, sort of, and that's from the Mycenaean Greek texts is the way they have it there. Now, Mycenaean Greek is apparently the oldest form of the Greek language that we are aware of, used from the 16th to 12th centuries BC. The language is preserved in inscriptions known as Linear B, and they were able to decipher it until 1952. But the language is named after Mycenae, one of the major centers of Mycenaean Greek. This would be part of what's known as the Bronze Age in that time frame. And it's thought that the name actually came from Asua, which is the name of the region during that particular time. After the Greco-Roman Wars of the early 5th century, the name Asia was often applied to the entire continent. And I just have a feeling that their continent was a bit smaller than our modern continent of Asia. I have a feeling they're talking more about the whole of what we would call Turkey today, rather than, I'm not sure they knew how big Asia really, really was. Under the Greeks, if you remember, Alexander the Great conquered this massive swaths of the known world at the time. And after his death, the kingdom was divided into 4 sections, each ruled by one of his 4 generals. And the area where we find this particular, which is up on the upper left-hand part of the map there, ended up as part of the Seleucid Empire. And the Seleucids and the Ptolemies feature quite a bit in things that took place in later biblical times, Old Testament times. So there it is. It's up in that particular area there. So by the time of Antiochus III the Great, a rule had broken down, and the area was very disorganized politically. Much of this area of Asia had become detached from the empire. This was the extent of the Seleucid Empire at the time that Antiochus III came to power. If you notice that whole section there, where Roman Asia ended up being, was no longer controlled by the Seleucids. Now, in Antiochus III the Great's early years of his rule, he attacked the Ptolemies. They controlled Syria, initially unsuccessful, but he ended up um, uh, unsuccessful getting the land, although he was able to recover quite a bit in uh, in Asia due to the efforts of his cousin Achaeus. Now, while dealing with the rebellions in the east, his cousin, though, revolted and assumed the title of the king of Asia. So it might have been his cousin, but he was after the power himself. Due to the mutiny of his troops, he desisted from the attempted coup. He retreated, but Antiochus was busy trying to win back territory in Syria. So he was left unchecked for a little while. Um, Hang on just one second. Somebody just came in there. They're admitted. So he ended up in a major battle, Antiochus did, against Ptolemy the Fourth in 217 BC at Raphia. And that's in the Gaza Strip today. That was a battle that he won. No, that's a battle that he was lost. He was defeated. He had to withdraw north of Lebanon, nullifying all the territory that he had conquered at that time. But he still had to deal with his cousin Achaeus over here in the Asian section. So he went after him, captured him after he fled to Sardis, and just executed him. Antiochus was able to recover the central part of Asia, although they were tolerating local dynasties in Pergamum. You can see that bit of orange there in the circle, and in Bithynia and Cappadocia. So they didn't conquer everything there. He then turned to recovering some of the outlying provinces in the north and east. And eventually, Antiochus ended up with all of this territory here. In fact, he followed Alexander the Great's footsteps. You notice he reached all the way to India. Punjab's there, also defeating various rebellions. He led a short expedition down to the Persian Gulf and had by this time restored the vast majority of the Seleucid Empire in the east, at which he assumed the title the Great. And that's where Alexander the Third, his name, the Third Great, comes from. By 198, he won the Battle of Panium, where that arrow was pointing, near the sources of the Jordan River. And that marked the end of the rule of the Ptolemies in Judea. He then turned his attention back to Asia to secure the coastal towns, which had been independent Greek cities or had belonged to the Ptolemies. In the meantime, the Roman Republic had arisen. The Romans weren't happy with what Antiochus was doing. Smyrna and Lampsacus appealed to the Republic for help, and they saw themselves as acting as the defender of Greek freedom. In 196, Antiochus established a foothold in Thrace, which led to the evacuation of Greece by the Romans. So he invades into Greece. and he had this opportunity to go in there. He invades in 192 with an army of 10,000 men, and the Romans under Manius Achillesu Glabrio routed him at Thermopylae and forced him to withdraw from Greece back to Asia. The Romans then invaded Anatolia, which is Asia, and Greek Asia and Roman Asia, and defeated Antiochus at Magnesia and Sipylum in 190 BC, which delivered the Asian section into Rome. So all that going on there as he was uh, coming to the end of his reign. The Treaty of Apamea in 188 BC forced Antiochus to abandon all the territory north and west of the Taurus Mountains. And hopefully you can see Taurus Mountains there in the middle of that particular map. Most of this territory, though, the Roman Republic didn't want. They gave it to either Rhodes in the blue on the map or to Eumenes II in the kingdom of Pergamum in sort of the dark green there, with many Greek cities remaining free. Antiochus then lost many of the outlying provinces of the Seleucid Empire when those areas reasserted their independence. He made an expedition to the east, to Persia, and he ended up being killed pillaging a temple in 187 BC. By the way, the reason they pillaged temples was they were the banks of the time. That's where the wealth was stored. And so therefore, you need money to fund your expeditions, go pillage a temple. When he did that, he ended up being killed. Now we know of Antiochus through references in First Maccabees. He's introduced in chapter 1, but in chapter 8, we have a reference to his defeat by the Romans. And this is what we find there. Now, Judas Maccabees, heard of the fame of the Romans, that they were very strong and were well disposed towards all who made an alliance with them, that they pledged friendship to those who came to them, and that they were very strong. They also had defeated Antiochus the Great, king of Asia, who went to fight against them with 120 elephants and with cavalry and chariots and a very large army. He was crushed by them. They took him alive and decreed that he and those who would reign after him should pay a heavy tribute and give hostages and surrender some of their best provinces, the countries of India, Media, and Lydia. These they took from him and gave to King Eumenes. The remaining kingdoms and islands, as many as ever opposing them, they destroyed and enslaved. But with their friends and those who rely on them, they've kept friendship. They have subdued kings far and near, and as many as who have heard of their fame have feared them. Those whom they wish to help and to make kings, they make kings. And those whom they wish they depose, they have been greatly exalted. Yet for all this, not one of them has put a crown or worn purple as a mark of pride, for they've built for themselves a Senate chamber, and every day 320 senators constantly deliberate concerning the people to govern them well. They trust one man each year to rule over them and to control all their land. They all heed the one man, and there's no envy or jealousy among them. Now, it was Antiochus III, the Great's son, who is Antiochus IV Epiphanes, that led to the war and revolt by the Jews against the Seleucids. Antiochus III, though resettled 2,000 Jewish families from Babylonia into the Greek regions of Lydia and Phrygia. And that may account for some of the Jews who lived in this area in the first century. Josephus portrayed Antiochus the Great as a friend of the Jews in Jerusalem. He lowered taxes. He allowed the Jews to live by their own law, the Mosaic law. There is still a lot of Greek influence in the towns in this area, particularly in some of the architecture of the ruins that we saw. This is the theater at Pergamum, and it's a Greek theater. And when we were there, they told us how you can tell the difference between a Greek theater and a Roman theater. The Greeks built their theaters into the hillside. Makes a lot of sense to me, because that way you don't have to do massive construction. You simply smooth it out, get it the right shape, and lay it in there. The Romans built theirs primarily freestanding. So we have the seats there, and down at the bottom there would have been the backdrop and whatnot for the theater. So that's at Pergamum. There's a theater at Hierapolis, very impressive. They've reconstructed the backdrop there, but again built into the side of a hill. It's a Greek one. The theater at Laodicea. Again, this is one of the ones there. They've reconstructed this one, and again, built into the hillside. And there's an older one. No, this is another picture of it built into the hillside. And then there was an older one, also in Laodicea, that you can just see where the seats were. And again, using the hillside. By the way, that made a lot of sense. If you think back at the picture of Pergamum, by being there on the hillside, and it's, you know how hot it is where you all are, that they go in the evening to watch the theater, and the cool breezes, because they were way up on a hill, weren't they? They got the breezes there. And the same really with Ephesus, because that is a Greek theater built into the side of that hill. And the little street there goes down to the harbor, which is no longer there. It's been silted up. But again, they could come watch something and get the cool breezes. And the same with the theater at Miletus. Again, it was facing the harbor. Go there and get the evening breezes off the sea. Now, this theater in Miletus is fairly unique because it was originally Greek. It's built into the hillside, but it was expanded by the Romans. And if you notice on the left and the right, there are freestanding parts. So that's a bit of a Greek and Roman theater there. When Rome defeated Antiochus III in 190 BC, most of Asia was placed under the control of the Attalid dynasty based at Pergamum. Western Phrygia was given to Mithridates V, king of Pontus. You see Pontus there just beneath the Black Sea there. Caria and Lycia were given to Rhodes. So they sort of carved up the area a bit. When King Attalus III of Pergamum died in 133, he did not leave any legitimate heir. As he had been a close ally of Rome, he willed his kingdom to Rome. Now that didn't sit well with everyone. Eumenes staged a rebellion with the idea of taking the kingdom for himself. He defeated the Roman consul Crassus Mucianus in 131 at the battle that took place in Stratonicia. Another consul, Marcus Perperna, then defeated Eumenes in the first battle of the war. Take it back. I got these backwards. That's where the battle took place. And then the other one is where Eumenes fled when he was defeated. Marcus Perperna laid siege to the town, forced them to surrender, and Eumenes was taken into Rome's custody. Manius Aquilius then formally established this region as a Roman province of Asia. He was a Roman senator. He served as the consul of this area in 129 BC. So suddenly, this area is a Roman province. With Rome now in charge of this kingdom, there were some serious implications for the neighboring territories. I think they felt fairly comfortable with Rome over in Italy, but suddenly they're at their borders, on their doorstep. And it's during this time that the kingdom of Pontus gained greater status under Mithridates VI. This is the kingdom, this purplish area, the kingdom of Mithridates VI. And so he expanded and took over large swaths of the whole Asia and the whole bit of what we call Turkey today. Rome, of course, was not without its problems. Corruption was a primary one. Manius Aquilius was accused of maladministration in the province of Asia, a charge he was acquitted on, but he got acquitted because he bribed the judges. So you can see how low the Roman Republic had sunk. The corruption is seen in what Aquilius was doing. He offered one of the regions of Pergamum in Phrygia to the kings of Bithynia and Pontus, and the king of Pontus is the one who purchased it. But the senators back in Rome weren't happy about this. They were divided over it. In a speech made by Gaius Gracchus, he said that the senators were in one of three camps. There were those in favor of the sale to Pontus, there were those who were against it, and there were those who were silent. But the thing is, each of those three groups were accepting bribes. Those in favor of the sale were being bribed by the king of Pontus. Those who were against it were being bribed by the king of Bithynia. And those who were silent, maybe they were the most savvy of both, they accepted bribes from both kings to be silent and made each one believe that their silence was due to the bribe that they had given them. But it's a totally corrupt system at that point in time. But the king of Pontus, now in control, they became a formidable foe to Rome in Asia. By 88 BC, Mithridates VI of Pontus had conquered virtually all of the Roman province of Asia. They capitalized on the hatred of the corrupt Roman practices. Mithridates instigated a mass revolt against Rome. He ordered the slaughter of all Romans and Italians in the province of Asia. It's estimated that between 80,000 and 150,000 people were killed. In 85 BC, Lucius Cornelius Sulla defeated Mithridates and reorganized the province into 11 districts, each central to a number of smaller cities. Now, Sulla was a Roman general and a statesman of the Republic, but he was known for being not only a great commander, but being a very ruthless politician. He used violence to advance his career and his agenda. After organizing Asia, defeating Mithridates, he marched on Rome. And in 82 BC, defeated the Italian army, set himself up as dictator. He purged his opponents, reformed Roman constitutional law, restored the primacy of the Senate, and then resigned his dictatorship in 79 BC and retired to private life. But he left a precedent for future political leaders to use a military coup to attain political power through force. And that's what Julius Caesar did a few years later. With the division of the province into judicial areas, the centers became Ephesus, Pergamum, Smyrna, Adramyttium up there, Cyzicus up in the north, Synada, which is over there to the right, just off our map, Apamea, Miletus, and Halicarnassus. And those became the centers. But when you have that many centers of judicial areas, again, they began to compete to be the dominant city. And the three in particular that were really in the running was Ephesus, Pergamum, and Smyrna. This inter-city rivalry dated back centuries and really prevented there being any unity in the province. And that's when we come to Augustus. Augustus became emperor of the Roman Empire. He ruled from 27 BC until he died in 1480. And we are aware of Augustus because he's mentioned in the pages of the New Testament by Luke in particular. But under Augustus, the empire continued expanding. This is where the empire was in 49 BC. And hopefully it's going to change in a second if it's working right. I don't know if it's going to, but expanded it into, yes, okay, it's not, well, let's see if we, yeah, there it goes. And so it expands then 44 BC, and you see it just continues to expand until 1480. So under Augustus, they were able to do quite a bit of expansion. He established a proconsulship for the province of Asia. He added the regions of Nysia, Lydia, Caria, and Phrygia to the province. He also established the province of Galatia to the east. You can see that just right of center in the map there. The proconsul would spend his year-long term traveling through the province, hearing cases, conducting judicial business at the centers that had already been established. As Rome transitioned from a republic to an empire, the provincial cities changed from being autonomous city-states to being Roman administrative centers. The Asian province grew into an elaborate system of self-governing cities, each responsible for its own economics, taxes, and law within its territory. Under Augustus, public building became the defining characteristic of a city. And it's the reason we have such good ruins to visit today in Western Turkey. Now, we should consider just for a minute just exactly what is a Roman province. Now, I'd always had in my mind that a province of Rome was very much like maybe a county or something. That's not the way I learned that Romans would have looked at it. This is what William Ramsay wrote about it. He says the province was not a tract of land subjected to Rome as a definite tract of the earth. Asia originally had no existence except in the sense of the whole vast continent, which is still known under that name. A province to the Roman mind meant literally a sphere of duty and was an administrative, not a geographical fact. The province of a magistrate might be the stating of law in Rome, or the superintendence of a great road, or the administration of a region or district of the world. But it was not and could not be, except in a lucid derivative way, a tract of the country. From the Asian point of view, the province was the aspect in which Rome manifested itself to the people of Asia. Conversely, the province was the form under which the people of Asia constituted a part of the empire. In many ways, it seems we're not talking about an area of land as much as we're talking about an idea about what Rome administered in that particular area. To those living in Asia, the place of the province, including the following. The province of Asia was the entire sum of the administrative duties connected with that part of the empire. That would include the body of officials who conducted the administration, and in particular the Roman Senate, which acted through one person it chose to represent the Asians. One senator was delegated the administrative power of the province of Asia for the period of a year. He became the proconsul. The province was also the sum of the religious duties and rites, which was to be the bond of unity that held the people of Asia together and made them part of the imperial realm. And this was expressed to them by the priests, who made up what was called the commune of Asia, which was in essence the parliament. The one representative body spoke for the province of Asia. The province was the status as well, which people in the cities occupied in the Roman Empire. Because they were part of the empire, they had certain privileges, and their rights and duties were determined by the law of the province. And this was drawn up to regulate the admission of a province into the empire, somewhat like a contract. Someone from Phrygia, for instance, had a place in the empire, not because he was in a Phrygian or living in the area of Phrygia. He had a place in the empire because he was part of Asia, or whatever province he happened to be. A Phrygian was a member of a foreign country that had been conquered, but an Asian was part of the empire. Less privileges than a Roman citizen, but still with certain rights and duties. And these rights and duties were partially civil and partially religious. Because he was an Asian, he had to act and feel that he was part of the empire. He had to be loyal and patriotic. And these were expressed through the religion of the province, which was the imperial cult. And hopefully some of that makes some sense, because I was struggling to get my head around what a province was. But hopefully that's something that hopefully you can make some sense of. When Augustus became Caesar, he brought several things to the new empire. One of the things he brought was the imperial cult. All loyal subjects of the empire had to conform to the state religion of the emperors. All had to take part in the rituals of the imperial cult as outlined by the commerce of the province. And that included the rituals, how the rituals were performed, the building of temples, the erection of statues, fixed holidays and festivals, and the list could go on. Soon after Augustus came to power, temples were built in his honor across Roman Asia. After Julius Caesar's death, the Senate had posthumously recognized him as a deity of the Roman state. He is known as Divus Julius, or Divine Julius. Augustus, or Octavian as he initially was called, being Julius' designated successor, began to call himself Divi Filius, son of the divine. There were also established provincial centers for the imperial cult that then produced local cults as well. Encyclopedia, Wikipedia, said this about it. The imperial cult served as a way for subjects of Asia province to come to terms with the imperial rule within the framework of their communities. Religious practices were very much a public affair and involved citizens in all aspects, including prayer, sacrifice, and processions. Rituals held in honor of a particular emperor frequently outnumbered those of other gods. No other cult matched the imperial cult in terms of dispersion and commonality. And I hope we can see that this would be a problem for Christians who were advocating that there was only one Lord, and it wasn't Caesar. To an extent, the Jews were largely overlooked in this, but the Christians, especially those who were from the local populace, were not defined as Jews and were expected to take part as they always had. We'll see some of this coming through the letters we get to in Revelation 2 and 3. Augustus also brought in an era of peace. Although he began by further expanding the empire, moving south into Egypt and other areas, including expanding into Africa, moving north into Europe, although it took him a while to conquer Germania, but he also made peace with the Parthian Empire through this diplomacy, established a buffer region of other states that were between them and their enemies. But he brought in an era of what we call Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. And the Roman world under Augustus then was largely free of armed conflict. This had an effect on Roman Asia as well. When you think about all that went on under the Seleucids and then the early days of the Roman Republic, it was centuries of conflict, centuries of city-states vying with each other for power. But under Augustus in Rome, they were united. In fact, it's at the point there's only a minimal military presence in Asia, Roman Asia, which was to put down the occasional revolt. Again, the Wikipedia says, in fact, Asia province was unique, that it was one of the few ungarrisoned provinces of the empire. While no full legions were ever stationed inside the province, that is not to say that there was no military presence whatsoever. Legionary detachments were present in the Phrygian cities of Apamea and Amorium. Auxiliary cohorts were stationed in Phrygian Eumenia, while smaller groups of soldiers regularly patrolled the mountainous regions. But again, if you think about the Christians living in Roman Asia, that would have had an effect on them as well. And I'm sure some of that's going to come out in the text of the letters. And the third thing that Augustus brought was a different system of government, what's known as the Principate system of government. The idea of a principate is that there was one single emperor, the princeps, who is the head of state without time limits and held the powers of consul and plebeian tribune. Perhaps this chart helps to show how the Roman Empire at that point worked. You've got the monarch, who is Augustus. He's the emperor, but you also have the imperial senate over on the left. And if you notice, they are reliant somewhat on each other as well as under different areas. The imperial senate held the legislative, judicial, and electoral power. The senate had the treasury and appointed proconsuls in the senatorial provinces. And if you notice the senatorial provinces in the bottom left of that chart, Roman Asia is part of what they were in control of. The emperor, on the other hand, had the Praetorian Guard. He appointed legates in the imperial provinces. And if you notice the imperial provinces on the right-hand side, the bottom right there, that included Judea. Now, due to the method of taxation under the Republic, many wealthy Romans had made loans, and when the loans couldn't be repaid, they had acquired land in Roman Asia. As a result, there's a lot of Romans now living throughout the area of Asia because of Antiochus III. A lot of Jews in the area because he had moved them there, but due to the taxation, a lot of Romans now acquired land and were living in the area. And by the way, it is a very beautiful area to live in. Now, I realize that we've crossed over a bit into what's going on in the first century. But that's a good point to ask the question, what was life like as a Christian in the first century in the Roman province of Asia? Now, some of this we're going to see as we look at the text of the letters. But the population in the first century was quite a diverse group. We mentioned the Jews have been resettled there, resulting in a substantial Jewish population. We'll see more about that in the letters in the coming weeks. And as we've just mentioned, Romans had settled there, plus there's still native people from this area. Now, education was available, but not everyone was equally educated. Not everyone had a Greek education. A lot of people still very superstitious. And by the way, even their whole religious system is very superstitious, as we would see it. But there was those who practiced as a magician. You remember in the New Testament, Simon the magician in Acts chapter 8 used various tricks to convince people that they were something. But that was pretty well widespread. There are also trade guilds going on connected to religion. Again, we'll see more of that in the letters. The commune, the parliament, although they didn't have the authority to issue laws, it could recommend certain courses of action to those who were not loyal citizens. And keep in mind, a loyal citizen was defined as someone who worshiped the emperor and worshiped Rome. William Ramsey writes, the commune would have no authority to issue a command or law, but it might signalize its devotion to the emperor by recommending that the disloyal should be discountenanced by the local, and that all loyal subjects should try to restrict their custom to those who were of proved loyalty. Such a recommendation might be made by a devoted and courtly body like the commune, and it was legal to do this because all who refused to engage in the public worship of the emperors were proscribed by imperial acts as traitors and outlaws, possessing no rights. And I think we can easily see how that's going to affect the Christian community. It could very quickly lead to persecution in various forms. The region itself was very wealthy, in fact, one of the wealthiest of the whole Roman Empire. Ramsey goes on to say, it was the wealthiest region of the whole Roman Empire, was therefore peculiarly tempting to the greed of the average Roman official. Amid the misgovernment and rapacity that attended the last years of the Republic, Asia suffered terribly. The Asiatics possessed money, and the ordinary Roman, whose characteristic faults were greed and cruelty, shrank from no crime in order to enrich himself quickly during his short tenure of office in the richest region of the world. You're going to be proconsul for a year. You're going to get all you can. And again, I hope we can see how that would affect the Christians who were used to a particular standard of life, but were now open to having it confiscated. Wealth brings its own problems. But interestingly, the people welcomed Rome with open arms because they brought in an era of comparative peace and order and respect for property. In their thinking, perhaps some of the abuses of the past would be corrected. And always lurking in the background was the imperial cult, the worship of the emperors. It didn't help that Augustus was loved by the people of Asia. Ramsay writes, in no part of the world, probably, was there such fervent and sincere loyalty to the emperors as in Asia. Augustus had been a savior to the Asian peoples, and they deified him as the savior of mankind and worshipped him with the most wholehearted devotion as the God incarnate in human form, the present deity. He alone stood between them and death or a life of misery and torture. They hailed the birthday of Augustus as the beginning of a new year, and they worshiped the incarnate God in public and in private. And I think when you read that from the pen of Ramsay, you can see that's going to pose a serious problem for Christians in this area, without a doubt. Serious problem. Part and parcel of all of this was that Roman provincial unity was linked to their common religion. This was the strongest idea in Asia at the time. This would influence the Christian communities in one way or another. Would they oppose it, or would they accommodate themselves to the realities of Roman political life? And again, we'll see some of the answer to that in the letters, but realize this was a real threat to them that they had to deal with. Even peace between two cities was based on the worship of pagan deities. Ramsay says, thus every treaty between two cities had its religious side and involved the common performance of rites by representatives of both sides. These rites might be performed either to the patron god of the two cities, which was usual, or to some god or gods chosen by common consent. It is an easy step, though not a necessary one, to institute also city temples of the same worship, so that the city may itself carry on the same ritual on its own behalf. All that's necessary for the common worship is one sacred place where the meetings can be held. Very soon, the Asian assembly began to worship the power of Rome. And this is a temple built to Rome. It stands at it's actually in Israel, stands at the entrance to Caesarea Maritima. It was just there at the harbor. So the first thing you'd see when you sailed into Caesarea Maritima was that they're good Romans. They worship Rome. And this is an artist's impression of that particular, what that would have looked like. See, when Augustus came along, as people were already worshiping Julius Caesar, they began to worship him as well. And it's interesting, there were temples to Augustus being built. Now, the only one I visited is actually, again, in Israel. This is you see some of the remains of the temple to Augustus, and this is in Caesarea Philippi, Banaeus, as it's called today. You can see on the left-hand part of that photo, one of the niches that there have been some sort of image in. You can see something on the right-hand side, some of the foundations there of it. But this was built by Herod the Great to honor Augustus in 19 BC. When Jesus was there with his disciples, this would have been there. This center where it was built would have looked something like this at its peak in the 200s AD. And the temple to Augustus is the one on the left there in front of the cave. The cave is Pan's Grotto. The temple in the middle is the temple to Zeus, all sorts of other temples. But this was going on in Israel itself as well. It shows you the extent of Roman worship, both of pagan gods and worship of the emperor. Ramsay writes, in that agglomeration of various countries and nations, differing in race and in speech, The one deep-seated unifying feeling arose from the common relation which all stood to the emperor and to Rome. There's nothing else to hold the province together in a unity except the enthusiastic loyalty which all felt to the Roman imperial government. Of all that the Christians had to deal with in the first century, the worst would have been probably the provincial religious organization directed by the commune. And I hope I've adequately conveyed what the commune was: the closest body to a representative parliament, but based on the imperial binding religion. Ramsay explains the commune this way: it was essentially a body charged with religious duties, but religion was closely interwoven with civil affairs, and the commune had other work. It had control of certain revenues and must therefore have had an annual budget. It struck coins, etc. All that going on. Initially, there was one temple of Asian worship in Pergamum, but that didn't satisfy people in other parts of Asia. They wanted their own temple. So temples were then built in Smyrna and Ephesus and Sardis and other places. But each temple was a meeting place of the commune. And where the communes met, there were games described as common to Asia. And all of this had an effect on the Christians who lived there and grappled with these conditions and ideas in the first century. How did they live as a Christian, worshiping one true God, when everyone around them was unified in worshiping as part of one religion centered on the emperor and the empire, and that unified everyone? It wasn't easy. And as we said, it would lead to one of two outcomes. They'd either compromise and lose their distinctiveness as Christians, or they would keep their loyalty to Jesus, and they would face persecution. And we're going to see how this unfolds in the next few weeks.